Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and as you already said, I'm going to be talking about the topic of mind reading today. And the question that I will be discussing is, can you read my mind? Just to give you a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, the first thing I will do is just define what we as psychologists consider theory of mind. So the ability to read other people's minds. And as I personally am a developmental psychologist, I am then going to talk about the development. So at what age do we start reading other people's minds? And because it's quite tricky to find out when we do that, I'm also going to present some of the methods to you that we use to study theory of mind. And in the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about the conditions under which we read other people's minds, because we don't always do that. We wouldn't always just go ahead and read other people's minds, but there are certain conditions to it, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in the end. So I'll start off with the definition. So theory of mind is what we psychologists call the ability to attribute beliefs and desires to other people. So you can try and do that with me right now. Just try and attribute beliefs to me, or knowledge, or thoughts. What do you think I am thinking right now? Try and read my mind.
What you have to say.
Yes, I might be thinking about what to say next. Exactly, I might be thinking about what to say next. I might be thinking about, oh my God, what is the audience thinking about me right now? And so you see, you are quite good at attributing things to me. And that is a skill that we humans possess. We can attribute thoughts or beliefs to other people. That doesn't mean that we have any supernatural powers. And that also doesn't mean that we know exactly what another person is thinking. That is not the case. But we're pretty good at attributing beliefs to other people, desires, intents, and knowledge. We can do that. And from guessing what another person might believe or desire, we can then predict what they are going to do next. So we can predict behavior from that. Let's look at some examples. For example, if you hear a person sneezing behind you, you might want to offer them a tissue because you might think that it's their desire to blow their nose, attributing a desire there. Another situation might be, you have been cooking dinner for quite a while and you prepared a very fancy meal and you invited friends over, and when you try your food first, you realize, oh my God, I forgot to add salt. There's no salt in the food. So what you might want to do is offer salt to other people, because you could predict that it would be their intent to salt the food that hasn't got any salt in it. So that's another situation where we could do that in everyday life. And also, for example, if you are walking through a door and you have somebody walking behind you, then you might want to hold that door for the person, because usually it is the belief of the person behind you that you will hold the door and you won't let it slam into his face. So it would usually be the correct reaction to hold the door open for somebody, because otherwise this false belief might lead to quite bad injuries and those things. So we can do this. We can read other people's minds, or at least predict what they are believing. However, we can also be wrong about beliefs, or we can also know that other people have wrong beliefs. For example, imagine yourself trying to get a present for one of your friends. And usually you would spend quite a lot of time trying to figure out what your friend might desire. So this is theory of mind. You're trying to figure out which kind of present your friend might want. And then you might think that she just planned to travel to Cuba and she's planning a very nice holiday there and she's really interested in the country. So you have the perfect idea for a gift. You're going to get her a book about Cuba, a really interesting one, and you think that she's going to love it. But what you didn't know is that 2 days ago she just bought herself an e-book reader because she didn't want to take any books when she was traveling to Cuba, because that would be too heavy of a luggage weight. And you didn't know that. You had a false belief about that. So if you give the present to your friend and you put a lot of thought into that present, what do you think she's going to say? Is she going to say, oh, I hate this present, I didn't want to carry any books to Cuba? Or is she going to say, thank you, that was a nice thought? And usually if you give this present to another adult, she would know that you had a false belief about the situation, and therefore she would actually say thank you rather than being angry about the present. So as adults, we know that other people can have a false belief about something. And this means we are pretty good at reading other people's thoughts and beliefs, and we are also very good at doing this automatically. And there's one study that shows that we even do this automatically when we don't need to do it at all. So the research lab of Samson did this study where they looked at how automatically we perceive other people's perspectives. And this was a simple reaction time task. So subjects just had to judge how many dots are in this scene. And the only difference that you can see between those two scenes is that either an avatar is seeing the same amount of dots as you are, like on the right-hand side, or an avatar is seeing a different amount of dots than you are, which is the case on the left-hand side. And what they found in this study was that subjects were a lot slower at judging how many dots are in the scene for the left-hand side when the avatar was seeing a different perspective from them themselves. So it seems like we automatically perceive other people's perspectives, even if it's completely irrelevant to our task, in this case even hindering us from doing the right thing. So we do this very automatically, and you might think, oh, that's useless if we do it in this situation, that keeps us from answering correctly. But it's actually very useful in everyday life if we automatically perceive other people's perspective. For example, imagine yourself walking on a busy road and there are people all around you. In this case, you automatically perceive the other people's perspectives and you know where they are going to go next. So then you know when they are going to cross your path. And when you're doing this automatically, you can walk around a lot quicker and you will know a lot quicker whether you can walk or whether you have to stop in this situation. So this is theory of mind in our everyday life, and we as adults are very good at that. We do that all the time. Now the question for me as a developmental psychologist is, when do we start doing that? So at what age do we start attributing beliefs and desires to other people? And there are some studies that show that we try to do that from quite an early age on. So I'm going to show you a child correctly attributing an intent. So this child correctly attributed the intent to the adult in this scene that he wanted to put the books into the cupboard. And kids do that from quite an early age on. This was a very young child. And they even do that if it's quite a big effort for them to do this, as you're going to see in this video. So it was a very big effort for this kid to get up and pick up the pin, but he still did it because he knew that the intent of the adult in the video was to get the pin back. So kids do that from quite an early age on, but we as scientists want to measure that in the lab, so we want to find out when exactly this happens. And the most famous task that is being used to study theory of mind in a lab setting is called the Sally-N task. And this task basically has two agents. We have Sally and we have Anne, and Sally has a ball that she likes to play with, and she then puts this ball in a basket to play with it later. And Sally watches all of that, and then Sally leaves, and Anne moves the ball from the basket to the box. Now the question is, when Sally comes back, where is she going to look for the ball? What do you think? Exactly, in the basket. Very well done. And kids can do that from around the age of 4 to 6 years onwards. So we're not the only people who know that, but kids know that as well. And when I was just telling the story, that was pretty abstract. So what we usually do in our labs is we actually act it out. And we have puppets that we are acting with. So this is Mr. Turtle. He's one of the agents. And then we have Mr. Fox. And Mr. Fox has his ball here, and he likes to play with the ball. He's walking around with the ball. Then he's being called for dinner by his mom, and he decides to put the ball in the box. So he opens the box, puts it in there. There we go. Mr. Turtle is watching. And then Mr. Fox leaves for dinner. There he goes. And while he's gone, Mr. Turtle opens the box again, takes the ball out, and moves it to the other box. That's pretty cheeky. So he moves it over there. There we go. Now when Mr. Fox comes back, where is he going to look for the ball? Very good, he's going to look over there. And usually kids pass this task from quite an early age on, so around 4 or 5 years of age, and they know exactly where Mr. Fox is going to look for the ball. And by us acting out the situation, it gets a bit easier for the kids to imagine what that looks like. So this is called a change of location task, because we change the location of the ball here. And there are also other tasks that we can do with kids, for example, the so-called unexpected content task. I'm just going to show to you how that looks like in our lab. So this is another way to test false belief understanding. If we ask a person who has a false belief about the box, like the mom of this little child, what is she going to think that is in there? And this little girl did it very well. So she correctly guessed that her mom would say there's chocolate in there because she has a false belief about the content. And this is a task that you can also try at home if you maybe have kids on your own and see if they already understand false beliefs. But as you might have noticed, this task is fairly complex. So the kids have to understand language very well to pass this task, and we are using fairly complex sentences for quite a young child. So if a child doesn't pass this task, which they usually don't around the age of 3 or younger, it might either be because they don't understand false beliefs, or it might also be because they are just verbally not capable of solving this task. So what we are trying to do to test even younger children is we are developing non-verbal tasks as well, so that kids can pass them without needing to be able to understand language. And one of those tasks involves, for example, helping behavior. You already saw in the videos earlier that kids are very keen on helping adults. They're very nice and they are trying to help an adult whenever possible. And there's one task that is fairly similar to the one that I just showed you, where we also use boxes, and somebody puts a toy in one of the boxes and leaves, and another person takes the toy out and moves it to the different box. And now in this paradigm, the first person comes back and tries to get his toy from the first box, of course. So he has the false belief that the ball is still in there. And then the kid can help this person open the box, because those boxes are actually really difficult to open, and only the kid knows how to open the boxes. The adult can't open it, he fails. And when we then measure where the child is going to try and help that person, they actually don't go ahead and go towards the box where the man is standing to help him, but they actually go to the other box that he isn't trying to open and get the toy out of there. So that means they understand that this guy doesn't just want to open a random box, but that he's interested in getting the content, and they correctly see that he has a false belief in this situation. So children can pass these tasks from an earlier age on, around the age of 18 months, so that's quite young. But you might argue that this still involves moving around and walking or crawling to the boxes and being able to open them. So this is still a fairly difficult task in that sense. But there is one other thing that kids can do from a very, very early age on, and I don't mean crying or sleeping, no, I mean looking at things. And they do that all the time. And people usually look at things that are somewhat interesting to them. So people wouldn't just stare at a white wall, that's totally boring, but people would try to find something interesting to look at. And usually people look where something is going to happen next. So they would expect where something interesting might happen, and then they look there. And even babies do that. Even babies search for interesting things to look at. And we can then measure where a person is looking and where they expect something to happen. So we can look at eye movements. And there's one machine that helps us do that, and this is called an eye tracker. And you can see this machine over there. And it basically contains cameras that can measure eye movements, and that can tell us in a quite detailed way where somebody is looking in the real world or on a computer screen. And you can see that we can then visualize the eyes over there on the bottom right side of the screen, and we can see where that person is looking. And this means that we can then measure where babies are looking, where adults are looking, and where they are expecting something to happen. And we do that in a similar paradigm to the one that I just showed you. And first off, we start by letting the subjects know where something is going to happen. So we call that a familiarization. That means we show them the same thing over and over again, and after a while they know where the actress is going to search. So this looks like this, for example. The actress reaches for the ball. And if we show that to the infant 2 or 3 times, they know that the actress always reaches for the ball. So that's established. And then we show another video where we introduce a second agent. This is the teddy bear. And again, the actress reaches for the ball. And if we do that around 4 times, the infant will look towards the correct window, and they will correctly anticipate where the actress is going to reach next, which means we have familiarized them to look the correct way. And then we can start and test our interesting trials that we're actually interested in. So we can try and figure out whether they also understand false beliefs. And this is how a task looks like when we look at false beliefs. So we have the same agents. It's again the teddy bear and the actress. And the kids already know that the actress always goes for the ball. We then move the ball around between boxes so that we can be sure that the infant isn't just interested in one side of the screen, but that we actually move the ball around, and it's not just a so-called side bias, but that they are actually correctly anticipating a behavior. And now the interesting thing happens. The telephone rings. So the actress is turned away and she doesn't see what is happening. And while she is gone, the ball is actually moved. So the ball is gone and she can't actually search for the ball in this scene anymore. And again, she turns back and we have the typical pling sound that you always heard when she was going to reach for the ball. And if the child would correctly attribute the belief to her that she still thinks that the ball is in the right box here, then the child should look towards the right box, because the child would be expecting her to reach through there. And that's the only interesting thing that happens here. Nothing is really interesting to look at on the screen, but it would only be interesting if she reaches through there. And several studies do find that. Several studies find that both adults and also very young infants expect correctly where this actress is going to reach, and they look towards the correct side. However, at the moment, scientists are still discussing whether this really reflects the ability to read other people's minds, or this theory of mind that we classically define, or whether those might just be related to simpler mechanisms or maybe not be occurring at all. So this is one of the methods that is currently still under discussion. But there are also other methods that we can use to look at the theory of mind development, and one of those methods is called EEG. So we would take a cap that contains lots of little sensors that we call electrodes and put it on a baby's head. And those electrodes can pick up brain activity that's happening in the brain from the outside. So they can tell us which brain areas are active when the child is, for example, doing a theory of mind task. And we then know which areas are involved in theory of mind. And another thing that we can do is we can take pictures of the brain using so-called MRI scanners. And they can tell us which brain areas are bigger or smaller in people that read minds less or more often. And they can also tell us which brain areas are active when somebody is involved in a theory of mind task. And what studies showed so far is that the main area involved in mind reading is located in our temporal lobes. So that's over here in your brain, which means that if you're trying to read my mind right now, those areas of your brain are active and burning the calories that you just had for breakfast. So those areas seem to be involved in mind reading. So basically research shows that we can measure theory of mind quite early, and there are several tasks to measure that. For example, verbal tasks or even implicit tasks using eye tracking. And people have even identified brain areas that are dedicated to mind reading. But the question that still remains is, do we always read other people's minds, or are there some conditions to it? And the clear answer to that is no, we don't always read other people's minds. But there are certain specific things that need to be given so that we do that. And one of those things is we wouldn't read other people's minds if we're involved in another difficult task. So for example, Schneider and her colleagues looked at that, and they did those theory of mind tasks that I just showed you with eye tracking, and they gave the subjects an additional task to do. So that was either just detecting a wave, or listening to letters, or even repeating things backwards. And they found that if subjects have to do a difficult task, like repeating things backwards, they wouldn't show the theory of mind pattern anymore. So they wouldn't engage in the mind reading the same as they did before. However, they only did it when they just had to do a simple task like detecting a wave. So there seem to be some conditions to that, like we don't do it if we're doing another difficult task. The second thing is that we need to pay attention to the mind reading to actually solve this task. For example, some researchers try to distract people by asking different questions, and if the question actually distracted the subjects from mind reading, they wouldn't solve the task correctly anymore. So it seems like we also need to pay attention to mind reading to actually do it. And another thing is that some people just do it more than others. So for example, a study shows that people who have autism do a lot less mind reading and are worse at solving the theory of mind tasks that I showed you earlier than typically developing children, or for example, people with Down syndrome. So it seems like there are just some subject groups that do mind reading less than others do. And some studies even show that people don't do it implicitly at all, but they need to have an explicit reason. They need to be explicitly asked to read another person's mind to actually try and engage in that. So it seems like we don't really always do that, but the question is, do we actually need to always do that? I mean, of course, there are some situations where it's quite useful to try and attribute desires or beliefs to other people. For example, imagine you're on a first date, you're having a nice candlelight dinner. It might be quite useful to try and figure out what your date is thinking in that situation, right? So it might be quite good to attribute desires to your date. And for example, if you see your date shiver, you can attribute the desire to be warm to them, and you might offer them your coat. So this is a situation where it might be very useful to try and read other people's minds. However, there are also some situations where it just would be crazy to try and read everybody else's mind. Like for example, imagine yourself at a big concert in the middle of London with thousands of other people around you. It would be exhausting to try and read everybody else's mind. And you just don't have the resources to that, because your brain needs a lot of energy to try and read another person's mind. We already said your brain areas become active on the side here. And it would just be way too much energy to try and read everybody else's mind. So that wouldn't be efficient, and it would be useless in this situation as well. Why would you want to know what another person is thinking there? So the same would be true if you're, for example, watching a soccer play and there are so many other people around you that it's not really efficient to try and read everybody else's mind. But in contrast to that, if you are shooting a penalty, if you're actually one of the players on the field, then it might actually be interesting again to try and read another person's mind, which is the goalkeeper. You might, for example, attribute the belief to them that you might shoot left, so you're going to shoot right, and this might help you actually score a goal. So as you see, there are some situations where it's useful to read other people's minds and others where it might be less useful. So just to sum up what I showed you today, research shows that we are able to attribute beliefs to other people, which doesn't know that we know exactly what they are thinking, but it does mean that we have a fairly good picture of how they are going to behave next, and we can attribute a behavior based on those background informations. And this develops quite early in childhood, so even children try to attribute beliefs to other people. However, we don't always do that, but we require to have no distractions that keep us from reading another person's mind. We need to pay attention to the actual process, and we should also have a certain interest in reading that person's mind. So to answer the question, can you read my mind? Well, the answer is yes. At least you can track my beliefs and desires if you try. And in that sense, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.